Episode 253. I'm sitting in my office. The walls are now green. If you're watching, you can see behind me. It's empty. My recording table is a TV tray. If it's echoey, I apologize, but not really. And it's the day after the 130th running of the Boston Marathon. The year Molly died, it was the 120th running of the marathon, and I went with Robin. We stood just ahead of Kenmore Square, above the big Sitco sign, and watched all the runners come in, from the early leaders all the way through the fundraising athletes. I spent a lot of the day on the phone with Roy fighting. I had gone to a Red Sox game and he didn't like who I was with and had somehow figured out that that's who I was with. We had this big fight about it. That was on Monday, April 18th, 2016. So we're in that week now. We're in that final week of school, the final week that Molly was alive at school, and all of the chaos that this week entails. And I think it sits and simmers in me sometimes. Wednesday of that week, I drove to Marblehead with $2,500 in cash that I was going to give to Roy, because then he couldn't say that yet again he paid for a trip that the girl he invited didn't go on. I would give him the money. I wasn't going. I had decided not to go. And we had a very tumultuous day. It was one of the times he showed physical violence. He broke a chair, called me a string of disgusting words. He was angry. At the end of that day, I had agreed to go, and I packed my bags and left 3 days later. Friday of that week was when I dropped off Molly at school and watched her walk in with all her stuff. Her little pants were a little too short and her ankles showed, and her ponytail swung. And I remember having this fleeting feeling of, what if this is the last time I ever saw her walk in there? And then I brushed it out of my head as quickly as I could and drove away. But I started to cry. And I remember it was all tied up in so many different things. It was all tied up in Roy. It was all tied up in Molly and Gracie. It was tied up in the disaster that my life felt like, not knowing just a week and 2 days later it would really blow up. I didn't go back to the marathon for a long time. I couldn't face it, didn't think about it. I used to have a very, very close relationship with the Boston Marathon. And as I record this, it's the day after. You're listening to it on April 28th, which is another significant day. And I'll get to that in a minute. When I lost my job in 2011, I was cut off from all of my running community. People didn't know what to believe. I had to bring letters verifying that I didn't lose my job for any untold thing, that it was political in nature. But of course, the people, the Gene Connollys and Chris Raths, did not care one bit what that did to me. Their agenda had been covered. I've paid for that for a long time. And one of the things I lost in losing my job was my relationship with the marathon. I stopped going. I stopped going to running practices. I maintained race directorship of the Bill Lutie race. I eventually got back into coaching a little bit, although we all know how that story ended. But it took me a long time to go back to the marathon. It wasn't actually until last year, and I went down and never actually set foot outside that day. I worked inside a hotel taking pictures of people that had finished the marathon. And I did that again this year. And I brought my good friend Pam with me, and we had a blast. But today, I'm reflecting on our finish line experiences yesterday. Pam and I were right on the finish. We had credentials so we could get in, get right up where the press is and watch the finish up close. The best part of the day for me was reconnecting with a man named Tommy Marr. Tommy Marr and his brother were track and field officials forever in Massachusetts. I have so many stark, clear, vivid memories of interactions with them on the start lines and finish lines of every track meet and road race that I participated in Boston. One of my most stark memories was an 800-meter race at Boston College. It was like a twilight meet in the summer. It was pretty big. A lot of people were there. And I had my period. And I think I was running for Liberty at the time, or maybe I was in a BU uniform. I seem to remember that my bun huggers were red, which was a good thing. But we towed the line and we're getting ready to start, and they stand us up. Tommy comes over to me and he goes, "I think you have a problem you need to address." And he sort of points in the general direction of my waist. And I look down, and sure enough, I have two bright red splotches of blood on my inner thighs. So I realize I've bled through a tampon, so I have to address it. I don't want to miss the race. I'm like, "Can you give me 30 seconds? And he said yes. And so I yelled up into the stands, "Does anyone have a tampon?" And a tampon got chucked down. I took a couple of the girls that I was racing against under the bleachers, and they stood cover. And I stood behind next to a garbage can and changed my tampon. Took a dirty paper towel out of the garbage can and brushed the blood off my thighs with it, threw that back in, went out and ran the race. And I ended up winning that race. Embarrassing, sure, but it certainly does paint a very clear picture of what it means to be a female bodied athlete, that our bodies are uniquely female in that regard. And no matter how hard we train or how we might decide to change ourselves, certain things are well beyond our control. And my period would come when it came. We joked about it after, and the officials were impressed that I was just so sort of calm about it. But what was I going to do? I didn't want to miss my race. So yesterday, there he was, Tommy Marr, with his white hair and his still moving about quickly, but, clearly old. So I screamed and yelled his name, Tommy Marr, from where I was standing. He was across Boylston Street, so it was quite far away. But he heard me, and he looked up, and I was flailing and waving my arms, and he walked over. And I took his hands, and I said, I don't know if you remember me. And he said, Barbara Higgins. And yes. And so we just visited. He asked how I was doing. He says he'd never forget Boston College. It was just the sweetest exchange. I should have gotten a picture. It's my little regret. But it was such a wonderful, wonderful moment in the midst of a very busy day. I didn't miss a Boston Marathon probably for 25 years. I went every year, whether to spectate, whether to man a finish line clock, whether to bring young runners down to have a fun day at the marathon. I never missed it until I stopped going. So it's been a nice sort of reintroduction into the marathon. The BAA does a lot of things for the runners that are remarkable to me. They have this thing called the Unicorn Club, and if you're watching, I'm pointing to my water bottle with the Unicorn Club sticker on it. So the unicorn is the moniker for the BAA, the Boston Athletic Association. I don't know why, but it's a unicorn, and it's on it's their logo. So the Unicorn Club is any runner who has completed 5 or more Boston marathons. And they provide all these wonderful services should you decide to use them. You can put clothing, you can put your stuff that you wear to the starting line in a bag and it's waiting for you at the finish. You can get free massages. They have this big luncheon. And then there's the little photo booth that I work where we, enter their bib number in and up comes their name and where they placed and all of that. And we take pictures. An overriding theme for me through the day, though, was how we commemorate time. And I talk about this a lot. Chunks of years, 5 years, 10 years, quarter of a century. We commemorate these round numbers in so many things. And typically they're positive things, but it's hard for me not to commemorate Molly year after year in all the ways that sort of come through. 5 years was big because Jack was born that year, and that was the year that my doctor told me I would finally begin to see glimmers of hope of living without Molly. And now we're at 10, it's a decade, 10 years, both hands. Of course, I'm reliving so much of what went on that year and what's going on with me now. I'm also, quite honestly, feeling old. My knees hurt. I have a hard time standing up and sitting down. It's because I'm overweight right now. I'm so stressed and so out of shape. And, I cut all the blonde out of my hair, so I have this gray hair that I'm trying to like. But I'm having a very hard time. It's a big struggle. And I think part of it is just this time of year. And part of it is our inability to manipulate or control the passage of time. It does what it does. This is just hard for me sometimes. The marathon was interesting because when I first started going, you just walked anywhere you wanted to watch and you stood there. There were no barricades. There was nothing to keep people off the course. It was just really sort of a free-for-all in every way possible. Given the 2013 bombing, security is quite heightened. There's people watching from all angles and you need passes to get in. And so Pam and I were right on the finish, and I've never been there before. I've never gone up and watched it from there. I just haven't. What struck me was the number of people with those coveted right at the finish line seats who have little to no connection to the marathon at all. You have a lot of press people. And there was a special area for those ADA, compliance, so wheelchairs and things like this. But Pam and I stood at a roped-off area that was reserved for Bill Clinton, and so one of the BAA volunteers asked us to sort of keep guard and keep people out, so we felt very important. We didn't get to stay at the finish long enough to see if Bill and Hillary ever stood up there, but Chelsea ran. But I'm looking around, and most of the people were there because they knew somebody. And so there's somebody that they knew got them a spot at the finish. And I thought that that was a little bit sad. That if you're going to share coveted finish line spots, share them with people that have a history and a connection to the marathon. Which then got me thinking about last week's podcast episode, which is airing today as I record this, about Lady Justice and the Sisterhood of the Crones. And a crone is an old woman. And initially it's a negative definition, like a crotchety, wicked old witch. Oh, she's an old crone. You can think of all the villains in fairy tales that are old women. But mythologically speaking, and in lots of indigenous cultures, a crone is an older woman that has magic and mystery and power and experience and can be a truth teller and a healer and a knowledgeable asset to a community. Regardless, whether you like them or not, they're old. And it's hard for women to age, much harder for women to age than men. And I see it in marathon runners. I see it in our attitudes. Taking pictures yesterday, everybody was worried about their time and their place and their finish. But so many of the female athletes, and there were lots of crones in there, were just so worried about what they looked like. And that's something unique to women compared to men. Having said that, Pam and I were both struck by how many women in their 60s were expressing that they ran PRs, personal bests, like lifetime personal bests, runners that have been running for years and years and continuing to get better. It made us think we ought to train for a marathon, which I need to really think about. But it was a good day, and it's a reintroduction for me into the world of the marathon, what it meant to me to be there. You're listening to this on April 28th. I'm jumping back and forth a little bit now. April 28th is my sister Johanna's birthday. So happy birthday, Johanna. She's 56 today. When I was in Amsterdam with Roy, I left the girls with several $100s and a list of things to do to make sure to have Kenny do with them. And I scheduled things. And one of the things I scheduled was a trip to the Rockingham Mall with my mother and my sister Johanna for Gracie and Molly. And they went. And they went shopping and they went out for dinner. And I was sitting in a restaurant with Roy in the evening eating dinner. It was probably 7 o'clock our time in Amsterdam, which meant it was about 1 o'clock in New Hampshire. And I got pictures of them with Auntie at the mall. And I remember looking at the pictures and thinking that Molly just looked exhausted. Little did I know, she was days away from her final sleep. So they were there and they went shopping and bought all sorts of things, which they couldn't wait to show me when I got home. But April 28th was the day that Molly bought the pink dress that she continues to wear in her casket underground, a mile from me right now. She bought her the dress that she would be buried in. It was this beautiful pink Audrey Hepburn style dress. So pretty, I have a picture of it hanging on a hanger. And those are the weirdnesses when somebody dies and you look back on actions. Gracie remembers seeing her in the dress, thinking how beautiful it was, how that she couldn't wait to show me. When I got home, she actually showed me the dress and made me promise not to tell Molly that she'd shown me the dress. She has that memory etched in her mind, not knowing that Molly would be wearing it forever, just a few days later. So that's today, April 28th. As I record this and it's April 21st, I'm thinking of last week's podcast episode and the crones and aging women and what it means to live through generations of things and see how they morph and change from one thing to the next to the next. And it can be very difficult. I want things to stay the same. And I think a lot of us do. I had a conversation the other day with Bonnie LaRochelle, who is Jack's best friend Joey's grandmother. She was Gracie and Molly's first and third grade teachers. She has a big piece of our life. And we talked about how so many newcomers in Concord come here and want to change everything. It's like, why can't they embrace the culture of what Concord is? Not everything has to change. I can apply that to the marathon as well. My first 2 marathon experiences were on TV, walking home from Concord High School, 1 year in the pouring rain, 1 year in the hot sun, and watching on Channel 9 News, the winners. The whole marathon started at noon back in those days. Everyone started together. There was no separate starts. And so I knew to be home at about 2 o'clock, just get out of school a little early. I could watch both the men and the women finish and then go to track practice, which is what I did. So my very first ever Boston Marathon, Joni won, not knowing as I watched that she would be my college coach. 1980 was the Rosie Ruiz year, where the woman that cheated, she got crowned initially. And then, 1981, when I went with Coach Ludi and a bunch of Concord High kids, I don't even remember who won now. Isn't that terrible? That was my high school experience with the marathon. And then in college, of course, with Joni as our coach and her affiliations with Nike and being in Boston, which is, Patriots Day is a holiday, so there was no classes. And there's the marathon running right by BU. We went every year and watched the marathon. We'd watch it from Coolidge Corner. We'd watch near the finish. We'd watch in Newton. We'd watch in Brookline every year. And then the years after I was done with BU, I'd go. When I moved back to Concord, it became more of a work the marathon for Granite State Race Services. We had timing clocks all along the course. And so I would bring a timing clock in my car, set it to the official time. I don't know how we did it before cell phones, but we did somehow. That was the beauty of it. And I'd sit by a clock. So I always brought runners with me and such. And then it just all went away. It just sort of stopped for a while. And that's okay. I tried to reinvent it with Robin. And then things were so devastatingly horrible with Robin that I stayed away from it again after Molly's death. It was just all too much, just all too much. But the Crones, the Sisterhood of the Crones, by the time you hear this, I will have read the book and written a review on it. I'm going to read it on the plane. I've done neither of those things yet as I record. But I've thought a lot about what it means to be a crone, and a word came to mind for me that brings me back to my childhood. My mother would say, you and your cronies. And your cronies were like your girl group, your fearsome five or your fabulous five, the people that you hung out with, your girl squad, right? And so when I think of cronies in that regard as friends, I always think of it as a positive thing. But me with my affinity for words, crone is a female word that isn't necessarily positive, and cronies is actually sort of a male word that can refer to longtime friends, but mostly refers to like people that do things bad with you. Like Chris Rath and her cronies would be like Cass Ardinger and Jean Connolly, like your cronies. I think a school board and mayor and the people in charge, they all sort of chit chat with each other and make decisions and then try to make you think you made those decisions. That's what comes to mind with cronies. But I got to thinking of myself and how much I'm in this phase right now of really struggling with where I am in life. I'm still in generativity versus stagnation, which is that 40 to 65 year Eric Erickson phase. And I feel like, do I matter? Am I mattering less? How do I keep mattering without sounding like this old lady that keeps trying to insert herself in things? And I used an analogy in last week's newsletter about being up to my belly in generativity versus stagnation, while at the same time, integrity versus despair is lapping at my ankles. And that's 65 on. That's when you really have most likely moved out of the most active part of your life and you're doing a lot of looking back. I very much have no desire to step out of being active, but I see it. It's like my period coming whenever it wants. It's like time passing, even though I don't want it to. These things just happen. I'm having a hard time figuring out what to do and wrapping my head around it. And so to be going through all that in this particular time frame, in this last week of Molly being in school and seeing her friends, and then me leaving, and the last week of her life where it was just Gracie and Kenny and her. When we leave in 2 days from this recording, we leave for France. When you hear it, I'll be there. So next week, look forward to an episode of Gracie and I side by side here, recording an episode in Paris, which will be fun. And we'll be in the height of Death Week at that time, right? So the whole time I'm in Europe is the same time I was in Europe 10 years ago. It's not lost on me. And then when I get back and Gracie and I are talking about all of those things and Death Week, it'll be coming to you from Europe and it will be during Death Week. So that's where I am right now. The passage of time, it just has me all wrinkled up. Which brings me to the connection of the unicorn, the passage of time, getting older, being unique, not making sense, remembering things differently every time you remember them, memories being a story, not a factual recollection. I'm brought back to the unicorn, which is behind me here. So a unicorn is a fictional character, right? There's no such thing as a horse with a big thing coming out of its head that flies with a rainbow tail, right? But we use the word unicorn in magical ways. It's a favorite emblem for little girls' t-shirts. The number of people that wear unicorn onesies and dress up in fluffy unicorn costumes to race the marathon, primarily women, are too many to count. But it's a nickname I have. And as I battle acceptance of being a crone and trying to find power in it, as I relinquish my grip on youth and the former version of myself and try to recreate or continue to flesh out the current Barb, I think I'm going to embrace the unicorn My friend Emmy at CrossFit Amesbury calls me a unicorn. And in her mind, a unicorn is somebody that makes no sense. Like she's 57, but she had a baby, and she's 61 and she continually outperforms half the people in the gym. Like all of the things that go into making me me, she decides I'm a unicorn. And in my constant replay in my head of all things good and bad, mostly bad, and my desire for relevance and self-satisfaction and acceptance, I think I'm going to embrace my inner unicorn. So unicorns don't have wings. A winged horse is something different. Unicorns have a horn. Being a unicorn generally refers to a rare, highly sought-after individual, a person with a rare combination of skills. Okay, that makes sense. The King James Bible version mentions unicorns 9 times. And the unicorn is described as a powerful, untamable, and wild horned animal, not a mythical fairy tale creature. Most Bible translations replace unicorn with wild ox, a strong animal. In folklore, the unicorn symbolizes purity, grace, and enchantment. It represents purity and power, rare and magical. Chasing a unicorn can be chasing an impossible goal. These are all aspects of being a unicorn that I can bind myself to with great comfort. Like everything, the roots go back to ancient Greece and Bronze Age civilizations. Spiritually, unicorns embody purity, innocence, and transformative magic, often acting as a symbol of gentle power, healing, and direct connection to divine consciousness. I took one of the stickers, the Unicorn Club, going to put it on my car, and just try to really channel, as I fade out of generativity versus stagnation and into ego integrity versus despair, by researching the unicorn and channeling all the qualities that resonate with me, and to try to bring the metaphorical connections of the unicorn with me as I delve into the realities of being a crone, finding cronies that support all of my efforts and what I'm trying to do to make it through 10 years without Molly. 10 years, a decade. Tick tock, tick tock. From my green, empty office the day before we leave for Paris to you hearing it on April 28th while I'm in Paris, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you've had a wonderful week and that you continue to close out April with happiness. Be good to yourself. Be good to someone else. If you go into my website, you can leave me a voice message. I would love it. And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories, as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.